Okay, welcome back everyone for our final session. For this last session, I am going to be formally handing things over to Erin Hollander, who has already been very present in leadership at this meeting. But basically at this moment, my 2-year tenure as your president is officially coming to an end. And I am handing things off to my very capable vice president, who is now your president for the next 2 years, Erin Hollander. So he will be at the head of this organization for the next 2 years, making important decisions about meeting locations, meeting themes, all of that stuff is in his capable hands. And so he will be leading us in this final session and giving us some announcements about, what's coming for us in the future. And I'm handing things off to Erin.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thanks to you all here with us. And we are recording this session so that we can make it available also to membership who weren't able to be at this conference. Very rich series of discussions. But we want you to know that we're thinking of you as well, and you are included in these final reflections on our conference theme and announcements about what's coming next. So first of all, I have sort of 3 agenda items for the closing of our conference. Very simple: acknowledgements, reflections, and announcements. So I want to start just by acknowledging all the people who were involved in making this conference what I take to have been a wonderful success. First of all, Liza, for her leadership over the last 2 years under not the easiest circumstances, to say the least. So thank you. It's been a pleasure to work with you. But also to the entire board of the NAE, and especially Rock, Jacob, Joey, Sandra, for all of your assistance in helping with the many moving pieces of this conference and programming more broadly. We have to acknowledge the Cathedral team, none of whom are here at the moment, but whom we've spoken to in person, who might have the opportunity to watch the recording. Dean Patrick Malloy, Amy Lansky and Laura Bosley, as well as Jeff, who was indispensable in making sure that the IT was up and running and has worked so well, as well as Samuel, our organist from last night, and the security team, others I'm sure that I'm forgetting. Thanks also to our Cheminif, our new friends from Cheminif, with whom we're really excited to be in conversation with going forward. So I'm pleased that this is the beginning of something, not just a one-off encounter. Thanks again to Rock and Sandra for your work in hosting online coffee hours and receptions and the like. This was something we put in place before the meeting began. We thought, well, the receptions, the coffee hours are so important to what we're doing here. And to make that possible, even in a kind of refracted way for the online community was a great gift. So thank you again for doing that. I'm thrilled with how the hybrid component has gone. I think one brief thing to say about that is that, seeing how well this worked and seeing how much it meant to the variety of people who weren't able to be here in person, this is, I would like to say, this is the new norm for how we would like to plan conferences going forward. I cannot say it's the new standard because the Cathedral has been so gracious with this technology. We have a system here which is very sophisticated, which simply is not always going to be the case. We can be optimistic because the technology continues to get better, and I think more and more institutions are putting these sorts of systems in place. We can be aspirational, and it's certainly one of the key considerations that we will be considering when choosing venues in the future. It is not a guarantee, but it is something that will be constantly on our minds. More on next year shortly. Sort of conclude with that. But for the moment, I want to offer just a couple of reflections on the theme as we're tying up the theme in light of everything we've heard this weekend. As Liza mentioned at the outset, we weren't always positive that we had a single coherent theme here. We had a lot of indications of questions we wanted to pose out of the aesthetic tradition that both Liza and I study very closely, many others as well, of course, but the questions we started posing came together as the call for papers, which we've all seen. But I think I can say after hearing the papers from this weekend, I'm really delighted by the extent of the resonance, not only between the different paper offerings that we've heard, but also between the academic portions of the conference and the liturgical portions of the conference. That was certainly an intention going into it, but was by no means a guarantee. So I'm pleased to say that, in my impression anyway, that's been in place. I want to add that although this theme may seem marginal to some, I don't know if I should include this group in this. Maybe there are many of you who either, I mean, if this is going out to the wider membership, who didn't submit papers or didn't choose to come because you thought asceticism, what on earth? Or those who have the opportunity to do something here with us, but maybe are not inclined to think of this as the sort of heartstring of ecumenical endeavor. I want to signal at least that the kinds of conversations we've been having this weekend are reverberating in the very core, certainly of the World Council of Churches, Central Committee and the General Assembly that just took place. There were several of us who were present in Karlsruhe for the General Assembly. Rock and Sandra, Joey and I were there, I'm sure others as well. And you know, to be completely mercenary, my coverage of the World Council of Churches Assembly will appear in Ecumenical Trends in a couple of months, and so there will be a sort of roundup of a series of interviews with delegates from many different church communities, including the Archbishop of Canterbury, but also including people from Taizé, from the Iona community, from American Baptists, and it goes on and on. And I want to share with you a continuity between those conversations and questions that were increasingly in the fore, not only in personal conversations, but in the plenary sessions, the workshops at the World Council of Churches. And what really started emerging in that context was that the World Council of Churches Assembly this year had as its theme, Christ's love moves the world to reconciliation and unity. And there has been a lot of talk and a lot of interest in unity over the years, as we know. But where I think most of the energy was, not least because of the status of both within and between many of our church communities and national, international communities, was that reconciliation was really where the focus was. That to whatever extent we are interested in thinking about unity, it has to go by way of reconciliation. And that's not something that can just be asserted and achieved, but something that needs to be painstakingly habituated. And that, I think, is where asceticism comes in. And even though the word wasn't being used all that often at the assembly, again and again and again, the recognition kept coming to the surface that reconciliation requires truth-telling, in the sense of Truth and Reconciliation Commissions. It requires justice, in the sense of amends being made for broken relationships. The healing of relationships passes through the restoration of equity and dignity for all the parties involved. But it also requires what was called in the terms of the conference, in the terms of the assembly, a realignment of the heart. There were a couple of terms that were used for this. One that kept coming up was Susan Derber, who helped frame the conference, the assembly theme. Susan Derber's term that we're concerned at this assembly and in the ecumenical movement more broadly, not only with orthodoxy, in the sense of reconciling our ideas, not only orthopraxy in the sense of reconciling our action and coming into solidarity in our action, but also with what she called orthocardia, or rightness of the heart, a realignment of the heart towards one another, without which intellectual assent or practical collaboration is going to be, if not fruitless, because it might not be fruitless, but unsustainable. And so, obviously, there's an orthocardia is sort of a neologism, but this is a question that goes right back to the origins of the church and metanoia. The question of how kept coming up, and I think that's where our conference steps into the breach a little bit. There was a lot of energy around the idea of realigning the heart, but not as much concrete discussion of what that looks like and what are the resources that we have in our respective traditions for enacting orthocardia or realigning our hearts towards one another out of situations of grievance, out of situations of anger and fear, often completely justified, as was very clear, especially with the representatives of the Ukrainian churches and churches in Ethiopia and elsewhere. How do we uproot the poisons that accrue in our traditions, as well as in our own souls from the histories of violence to which our traditions are subject? How do we clear out the sort of self-serving detritus? And I'm very consciously evoking Evagrius here. I'm sorry our friend who presented on Maximus and Evagrius isn't here, but you know, the image that I retain from studying Evagrius in graduate school is the soul as a kind of murky pool or a murky well that's all stopped up. And it's stopped up with all the junk that gets gathered there by the ways that we fail in our relationships to live in the ways that the gospel is meant to form us, but often doesn't. And so for Evagrius, the work of ascesis is clearing out all the junk so that the love of God can flow through us into the world and towards one another. So that's in many ways at the heart of the question of ecumenism and asceticism, of what are the ways that we are able to work together and aid one another in clearing out all that detritus from our own selves and from our communities, our traditions. At the assembly, we kept coming back to practices like common prayer. And common prayer, especially with those with whom we disagree in profound ways. Service not only alongside those who agree with us on what kind of service needs to be enacted in the world, that's easy. And that's sort of the softball of the ecumenical movement is common collaborative action with people who already are sort of on the same side of the very cavernous gulfs in ethical orientation among the churches and within the churches. That's the easy stuff. More complicated and more difficult is being in service to those precisely that we don't agree with on the ethical orientation of the work that we need to be doing. And what that looks like was unresolved at the assembly, and I think we had the opportunity here to start. We didn't get into this, but this is, I think, a continuation of the conversation we've had over the course of the weekend. And the last thing that kept coming up repeatedly in the conversations that I was having, but also at the press conferences and plenaries, was the need for ecumenical formation, right? The need for formation at the parish level, and in other words, not only at gatherings of sort of trained and over-enthusiastic ecumenists, but at the parish level, in the kinds of dispositions that allow us to reimagine our relationships with each other and with those that we have feared or resented or assumed to be sub-Christian for whatever reason, or subhuman for whatever reason. In other words, ascesis. So all that's to say, let's take heart that the conversations we're having here aren't quite so marginal as they might seem. And if the World Council of Churches is only one example, certainly not the sole or not the really even the benchmark of what's possible ecumenically. But I wanted to share that dispatch from the WCC as a way of integrating what we've done and to say that we're really in many ways ahead of the curve. And I think we should take heart from that. So before closing announcements, and then I realized I didn't ask this ahead of time, but I'd like to do so now. Father Jim, would you, at the very end, would you offer a prayer in closing for our gathering? I'll ask you now so I don't spring it on you later, but thank you so much. But before any of that, and before my announcements, I want to take a few minutes, 5 to 10, whatever we feel inspired by, and open it up a little bit. I've offered my concluding reflections, but I want to ask you all, you here in the room, you here online, for anything that you'd like to add or share or dissent from in concluding our conversation this year of ecumenism and asceticism. Yeah, Jacob.
Just a thought from the mass readings this morning. The line that stuck out to me was, if he'd asked you to do something difficult, you would have done it with no problem. But he's asked you to do something simple, right? And so often the work of unity is precisely the simple work of deciding that in fact we're not divided from each other, right? Because the unique thing about the sin of schism is that it is entirely a sin of the will. So, and it just my thought in terms of these.
Yeah. We have a hand online. Ray, go ahead. If somebody can spotlight him, I can't do it at the moment.
Okay, hi, this is Ray. You don't need to see me. My question is, between meetings, what is the process for us to have conversations with the NAAE leadership over themes for upcoming meetings and suggested specific topics or papers that would be put into those themes so that it can be a conversation that comes before the call for papers each year? What's that process, please? Thank you.
That's a fine question. I think that the way that the process has worked is that it's the board that discusses themes, but ultimately it's the president and vice president who decide on the theme and formulate the call for papers. That said, I think I welcome input on this. The decision is going to be made at the board level, but input 100%. We're very interested in taking in and reflecting on suggested topics for conference themes, suggested locations for conferences. The call for papers will emerge out of the confluence between where we are and what we're talking about. But send us an email. And there are going to be, we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. I'll talk about this in announcements. We are going to have opportunities to be together online in between the annual meetings. We started that this year, and we're going to do more of it in the coming year. Thank you.
Sooner than later, you'll be hearing from me. Thank you.
Ray, let me add one more thing to that,
Yeah.
which is over the last year, we've done a couple of new book or other event, sort of mini events. Mm-hmm. And those are fairly easy to put together and have been very successful. So if you know of a new book or a new something or something we could do just an hour on an afternoon on Zoom on, let us know, because that's
thank you.
If you or others would like to organize events, get in touch. We'll make it happen. Yeah, Joey.
Hi, Ray, this is Joey. You can always email me.
I think I know. Yeah, explanation. Joey serves on the Faith and Order Commission in Southern California that I chair. So I think I know Joey.
Very good, very good. So thank you, Ray, for bringing that up. And we'll come back to a little bit more about that in announcements, but other concluding reflections on our theme. Oh yeah, Sandra, of course.
Hi. Should I spotlight myself? Oh, you did it. Okay. Just to reflect a bit on the online community in relation to the theme, we did really build a beautiful online community, I think, and that created a kind of sense of deepening the theme for us. If we were just watching and listening and maybe throwing in a comment here and there, it would be different, but we spent some time together. We introduced ourselves to each other, and so kind of started to feel like we were sharing a common bond and calling each other into this formation. And I really appreciated you using that language of formation as a way to talk about what's so necessary in ecumenism. So that was wonderful. We all felt that it would have been great to have had a little more opportunity to build a little bit of community with the people in the room. We realized we couldn't do this exactly the same, but just to get to know who was in the room a little bit would have been great for us, because we know you formed your community there in New York as well. Thanks.
It's a wonderful point, and something that we're in the frontier here, and we're learning how to do hybrid conferences, and we're learning something new every time. I will say this is by far the most coherent hybrid conference I've ever been part of, and I've done several. But you're absolutely right that there's room to grow, and I think we're taking this all on board, and next year we'll try new things and the technology will keep improving. So.
And
Thank
yeah,
you.
and I think just to remember that the online community did really work. It was
Yeah.
it's not an add-on. It was a really great experience for us that were in it. So
and part of the, part of the issue is that we have different people in the online room and different people in this room every time. And so there wasn't really an opportunity, I guess maybe the first night, but it was so packed already to kind of go around and introduce ourselves because there were people who came and went, and people came and went online too. So it's something we've got to keep thinking about.
Okay, and I want to add one thing I think is really pertinent.
Let's keep it to the theme if we can.
Yeah, I want to add one thing that I think is really pertinent to what Sandra said. The NAAE would do a very great service to the rest of the global community, ecumenically, but also for all scholarly societies to show everybody else that a small organization like this can do it with the tacit message. If they pick it up, then you can do it too. Now, this is very serious. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll help to communicate that if that could be done. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Should I?
No, you don't need it. From here.
We're live. When I was working at the Graymore Ecumenical and Interreligious Institute, I was able to attend all the meetings of the National Council of Churches Faith and Order Commission. And in the 90s, especially under the leadership of staff person, Brother Jeff Grow, it was a remarkable meeting place from people from other traditions. It wasn't just the ecumenical churches. And it really fostered and I think nurtured some really important theologians. Mel Robeck of Fuller Seminary and Tom Dayton, Wesleyan Holiness person, a place of community and building ecumenical power. And I'm wondering what has happened to the faith and order work of the National Council of Churches. There was a fairly recent article in JBS about it. Thorson, I think of the name, the last name, Don Thorson, was asking about it. And I'm not a person to investigate that, but I'm wondering if there's someone here who can sort of course, for those of you who don't know, the world at the National Council of Churches used to have 3 floors in the Inner Church Center at 120th Street in the Claremont Avenue here. And with the decline of the mainline churches, has been reduced to a few offices in New York City in a wonderful church building, which is owned by the United Methodists. In Washington, I'm sorry, it's in Washington. And it's coming into new leadership who I think would be very open to a discussion of this. Under Jeff Grow, he fostered, and the group met twice a year, and was fostering younger scholars into ecumenism and to meet with each other and to be sort of really avant-garde people in their traditions, if they were not already ecumenical. Those traditions were not ecumenically committed. And I just think someone should who might, someone that's a member of a church that's a member of the National Council of Churches could do some investigating.
Yeah, it's a great
really
reminder.
important.
And I know we have people active in the NAE who are also active in the NCC, and some of them are surely here. I know Rock as well.
But there needs to be a present day link to see what.
Yeah, and I think that's something we can continue to think through is what is the relationship between the Academy and the National Council, and that relationship is going to change over the years, but it's one that should be alive.
But I think we also need to scope out what the situation is there before you start relating. Say what is our faith and order people meeting at all, annually or at all?
That was Liz Mellon, former associate director of Graymore Ecumenical and Interreligious Institute. So there's a line of continuity between the job that she had and the job that I have now. Thank you. James, you want to weigh in?
Oh, yes, James DeLucio, again, hi, everybody. with the Paulist fathers here in New York. Just a quick question from Sister. Is there still the God box here
Yes.
or did that get dissolved? I get mixed messages about it.
That's where I work. That's where I work.
That's where you're stationed.
Yes, you're.
And it's right here by Riverside Church,
8 blocks up,
8 blocks.
right next to Riverside.
No, it's across the street, on 120th Street, Union Seminary is there, Riverside Church.
Okay. I want to visit it. I'm new in a formal way to ecumenical multi-faith, but I've been doing it in my ministry for the past 20 years. What I got a lot from this weekend, how important still was the early church models and the patristics and the doctors of the church, the early ones, the father, what we call fathers, no offense to the women, fathers of the church. I was a little surprised that we heard so much about Severus and Maximus and all this, and yet on another level, going back to my seminary days, well, I shouldn't have been surprised at all. But it was profoundly inspiring to go back to some of those much early writings and see how they have a lot of contemporary applications.
A lot of contemporary applications. I think there are unsung resources that resonate in new ways today. But I also want to lift up Sarah Wagner-Lawson's paper and the very important caution that she offered us about the dangers of recovering this heritage too uncritically, both in terms of recognizing that these men were men of their moment and had deep, profound spiritual insight and ascetical insight coupled with political and social assumptions that would not have been, that are not our own, and that this is, so that's one of the risks that she highlighted. The other one I think is just as important, which is that these ascetic authors themselves are saying, this isn't for everybody. And that's not to be exclusive and elitist. The point is, it's a practice that proceeds through time. Mm-hmm. You don't just throw the ascetical heritage out there and gobble it up and, enjoy it on Sundays. This is a way of life that proceeds over the course of years, over the course of a lifetime. And that you don't just go around contemplating the divine word because you haven't gotten there yet. You're still all jumbled up inside, right? So the ways that we retrieve the ascetical heritages are as important as the fact that we're doing it. Mm-hmm. So thank you for that. I think it's a wonderful compliment.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, I think this is something that's important, that when we talk about methodology, that the reading of ancient texts, you just don't pick up and read. And so that this is something that I think is missing in formation, is the reading of ancient texts, and also dealing with the question of conflict of interpretation. Because I think this is something that's really important in the whole ecumenical sphere of what we do. But unfortunately, many of our students today do not have the capabilities to do that, and they still project the filter that they have in their own mind onto texts from the 3rd, 4th, 5th centuries, and that doesn't help. That doesn't help, and it goes into the fundamentalist type of reading of these texts, which is the danger that she pointed out, I think.
It's such an important point, Jim. Thank you for that. In a way, this is basic hermeneutics, but that's also not taught by me. My patristics professor in graduate school, Lillian Otten, for those of you who may know her, she gave me my favorite tagline for this, or watchword for this, which is essentially go into patristics the way you go camping, right? Pack it in, pack it out. You can't go with nothing. You can't pick up the texts and read them and assume that you're going to know what they're talking about. You need to bring an apparatus, an interpretive apparatus. You need to bring learning in other fields. You need to bring linguistic competency, but make sure you're packing it back out again. Don't leave your interpretive apparatus in the patristic sources where you then forget that it was you that brought them there in the first place. So I carry that with me.
And the language as well, because these texts are being read in translation, not in the original languages, which is a problem because sometimes the translations don't miss a lot of what is really being said underneath.
Do we have any final concluding reflections on ecumenism and asceticism before we go to,
It struck me that at least 3 papers talked about liturgy as theologia prima, and if liturgy is a primary source, used I said that somewhat relativizes doctrine. I found it very fascinating. I can tell several of us were channeling Schneemann and Kavanaugh, and they did their work 30 years ago. It's work that's since been critiqued and nuanced, and that conversation has advanced, but I think that's certainly a fruitful area for ecumenical inquiry of worship as doctrine and the way in which worship can be primary.
Thank you. Ray, anything else on the theme before we go to announcements?
Yes, and thank you for recognizing me. My number of dogmatic pronouncements issues has risen to 2. The first being hybrid, but the second is, for the second conference in a row now, I keep hearing the same thing over and over, pardon the tone of my voice, younger, gotta form younger, gotta form younger. There's a both and here, folks, because there are a lot of us out there who are older by younger standards, but we're new to this. My case in point is I was involved, got involved, was invited to become involved formally in ecumenical matters when I was 49 by a 70s something, my mentor, John George Huber, whom I've already mentioned. There are lots of others like us out there, but when the formation is oriented only and the invitations and emphasis only are to younger, that sends an exclusionary signal, even though I know nobody intends that. So here's what I suggest. That in the offerings for formation, including what was mentioned here, yes, there needs to be encouragement of the younger, but at the same time, even if it's done in a different way, there has got to be the encouragement of those of us who are older but new. Since this is my first time to deliver a Jeremiah or whatever on this, I ask NAE, please, to change that paradigm and consider this. And now I'll be kind. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And yeah, thank you. Really, thank you. And this is an important question, and it's something that I heard Liza bringing up earlier as well. And obviously, the ambit of the North American Academy of Ecumenists isn't necessarily in ecumenical formation. I think we're talking about it and bringing back the insights from this kind of conversation, an academic conversation, back into our own context. But a lot of us are, wearing multiple hats, and there is absolutely opportunity to create new possibilities in those contexts. I would note, of course, that nothing in the NAE call for papers or board or anything is exclusionary of anybody at any age. I mean, that's simply not accurate. But if we're talking about ecumenical formation at a broader level, then yes, absolutely. There needs to be, I don't want to throw it back to sort of let 1,000 flowers bloom, but in a certain respect, there are going to be multiple formative institutions. There have to be. Right. Not everything is right for everybody. Not everything should be right for everybody, because then it will be right for nobody. So let's keep thinking about it and keep working on it in all our many different contexts.
Okay, thank you. I said that not to think that the NAE would do it really, but rather as a matter of let those who have ears, let them hear, including people in this room. That's all I meant. Please pass it on to your organizations. Thank you.
So with that, we'll bring the conference to a close in just a minute, but I want to make a couple of announcements about where we go from here. So as already mentioned, we had a couple of online events last year, some in collaboration with other networks, like Ecclesiological Investigations, others on our own. We did the book launch of Jacob's wonderful book. It was a fabulous conversation this summer. We want to do more of this. And so when the board meets next, one of the things that we want to do is prepare a programs committee that can be inclusive of both online events through the course of the year, as well as planning for the next in-person and hybrid conference. So stay tuned about that. I'm optimistic about the programs that are coming down the line, not only to have more content to talk about, but also to maintain the relationships that we're constantly building, and to be able to do that over the course of the year and not only once a year is a salutary thing. As for next year, as for the annual meeting, It's not certain, so don't carve it in your flesh or anything. But I would very much we're working on, and we hope to be able to announce in the coming couple of months that we will be in San Antonio next year. So if you remember, last year we were meant to be in San Antonio. We had a program all worked out. We had papers, we had everything set up with a host institution, Oblate School of Theology in San Antonio. And then there was a spike in COVID rates and still travel difficulties for Canadians and a lot of unvaccinated dependents, especially young children. And we said, you know what, we're not going to take the risk of going to Texas. That could be something always to be said, but we're going to try it one more time. We're going to try one more time to collaborate with Oblate. We had built that relationship already, and they were very excited to have us there. So we are working on it. We will have a formal announcement in the coming couple of months. I can give you the plausible dates. Again, they are not set in stone, but if you would like to save the dates, we're talking about November 16th and 17th, 2023. This is the same as it would have been last year in the sense of alternating between the independent conferences in September, beginning of October, and a version of the NAA conference that is sort of connected to the front end of the American Academy of Religion, which has been something that a lot of us have been seeking for a long time in order to cut down on travel expenses for those of us, or many of us who are going to the AAR, and also to facilitate cross-pollination with other groups, especially groups like Ecclesiological Investigations, who are engaged in very exciting and cutting-edge ecumenical work and should be part of our conversation as well. So if you're asking me, nobody did, but if you're asking, I guess you did when you appointed me president, so there you go. If you ask me, I think the model that we have already started falling into of alternating between conferences connected to AAR and conferences that are independent and one of our in a host institution or a host city seems to be like a salutary way forward, since there are strong enough reasons for both to be able to alternate. It seems like a good way forward, at least in the short term. So that's what I'd like to try to do. We'll be connected with San Antonio next year. After that, we want to come back to Canada. That process has not yet begun. We've got a while to worry about it, but that's something that I want to commit to, is bringing us back to Canada. And as Rock mentioned during the membership meeting, we have our first Mexican board member who we're very excited to be working with on truly expanding the reach, the linguistic consciousness, and the hosting possibilities of the NAE to include Latin America as well. So stay tuned on all that. The last thing I will say is that, just to reiterate, and especially for those who were not able to be here on Friday, membership is open for 2023. There is, I believe, a discount if you renew your membership before the start of the new year for the new year. We do that so that we can align the membership year with the journal year. Membership includes a print and digital subscription to the Journal of Ecumenical Studies, but it also includes discounts to the annual, significant discount for conference participation, and free attendance at any of the in-between events that we're going to hold during the year. So that's worth doing. I encourage you to do it, and that is open now on our website, ecumenists.org. And if Sandra or Beth would put that in the chat, so much the better. Please finally stay tuned about an email with a formal announcement again about the awards, the two awards. The one, the student award, Brother Jeffrey Grow Student Award, and our brand new, as of this year, more general award with particular interest, I think, in members of religious communities and contingent faculty. But really, it will be open to anybody with significant financial hardship in attending an NAE gathering, the Sister Lorelei Fuchs Award. As mentioned on Friday, the board is making an initial contribution to get that second award up and running, and we will have opportunities to donate into it via the website. So thank you again in advance for helping us make that a reality. So with that, I'd like to formally bring the 2022 annual gathering of the NAE to a close, and I'd like to ask Father Jim Pugliese to offer a prayer to close us out.
Let us pray. Good and gracious God, we give you thanks for the many gifts of your creation that surround us here today. Those that we find in nature and those that we find in your creation of human persons. We give you thanks for their contribution to the work that your Son has entrusted to us for the unity of all those who believe in him. We ask that your Holy Spirit strengthen us as we go on our way, to be renewed by your love, your forgiveness, and your graciousness, that we might be faithful children to you and to the mission that you have entrusted to us. We make our prayer in the name of your Son, Jesus, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all, and go in peace.
Thank you all. Thank you.